What is up, Ninja? My name is Sam World, and lately it's been really hot in California, and it doesn't help that we've been making fire tracks in the Start to Finish series, which I just finished here on YouTube, the stamped one. Now, in this video, guys, we're going to be going over 5 tips that I did in that series, which I thought were super cool, that we kind of figured out in the track that helped us. And I'm also going to discuss some stuff which I wish I would have done a bit differently, and that I know will help you guys out in the long run. These are little insecurities to tips that can help you guys, and today we're going to be going over them. As always, guys, if you want to support the channel, make sure to head over to evilsounds.com where you can find all my sound design work. And now let's get started with the tips. Our first tip, guys, is going to be to trust the idea. Now, if you're the type of producer that has an idea, you think it sounds good at first, and then after a while, obviously, of hearing it on loop, you get tired of it, and then you start to overcompensate by throwing a bunch of random shit in there that shouldn't be in there. For me, it was a random downlifter in the track, which I don't know why I left in there, even to the end of the series. But I feel like if I would have gotten rid of some effects, the track would have sounded a lot cleaner and it would have hit a lot harder. So trusting the idea means that, you trust the elements that you have, the main idea that you have, and don't try to overcompensate by throwing random stuff in there. You're just making your life a lot harder, because at the end of the day, as you know, we're gonna have to make room for all these sounds, and they're gonna have to sound good together. And the more stuff you have, the more chances of you fucking it up. Now, as well, while we were doing this series, fun fact, Kirby released a song called Jaw Drop, and the idea was very similar. I didn't copy him, I didn't get inspired from him, but it was just a coincidence that it happened that way. So I thought that was pretty neat. A lot of you guys were telling me midway through the series and whatnot. And again, if you hear his track compared to the drop I'm about to show you, his sounds very plain but strong, while mine sounds like good, but there's just a lot of elements in there that I could have done away with. Again, like that downlifter and uplifter that we were talking about. Trust your idea. Now, what this means, guys, is simple. A lot of the times you guys will have ideas that are good, but after you hear it for a while, for instance, you start hearing this damn loop constantly, like just like, like you start to kind of question it. So you start to add effects that really you think like, so for some reason they do something, or you add a pad playing something, but you can't even hear it. This stuff is still taking up space in your mix. It doesn't make sense sometimes. But again, that insecurity of yours is just kicking in. You might decide to bring in a new ARP melody when you already have another ARP. Again, it might be different for you, but for me in this example, it's this damn downlifter that shouldn't be here to begin with. So I'll show you guys how it sounds like with it on. All right, so you probably heard that, and to some, you're like, well, it sounds fine, Sam. And to me, you know what? It might be an insecurity. I'm not trusting that downlifter. I don't know. But the point is again, when you start to question, like, you start to question and you start hearing other people's music, is the downlifter needed in the drop like that? Well, for me, I've made genres like progressive house and big room and Anjuna Deep stuff, which I'm currently making, chill stuff and whatnot. But a lot of the times you hear that and it's not needed. Back then maybe, but now not really. So if I get rid of it, look at how much stronger it sounds. And there it goes again. So again, remember, anytime you add something to your song, it's going to take up space. And the question is, does it accentuate the idea that much? And if it doesn't, get rid of it. Now, I may be overthinking it because of the Kirby Jaw Drop where he doesn't really utilize that, and his sounds a little bit more raw and more FM-y, while mine's is a little bit more like, Juan Jordan or wannabe Julian Jordan, which is cool. I'm here to teach you guys how to make this stuff. But again, that's something I wish I would have done differently. I would have gotten rid of. And again, with you, it might be something different. But even something as little as a downlifter that's not needed can play a huge role, whether your track sounds dope or whether it sounds a little like, why did you even add that? The second tip I have for you guys from the series that really helped was to push the sound before you start to take away from it. For instance, in the lead for this track that we got going on, the sound had to be pushed heavily in order to get it to sound any sort of usable for this genre. After we pushed it, there was a lot of unwanted material there that we had to remove, so that's when you can come in with the EQ. Now, the reason you want to do this before the EQ is just due to the fact that if you EQ before the saturation, you're going to remove a lot of stuff that's going to interact with the saturator. For instance, let's say we have a nice sound, and then you decide to do a low pass on it and you remove a lot of the mid and high content on it. When you saturate, the saturator is only going to hit the low part of that sound because you filtered most of it. What you want to do is you want to let the whole sound go through it so that it gets the juices from the saturator, similar to, you know, putting salt on a chicken. And then you're gonna remove the salt if you put a little too much. In real life you can't, but when it comes to music production you can. And then you start to shake the sound to what you can actually use. Remove mud, remove stuff that the saturator gave you that you don't want, but then you're gonna end up with a nice result. All right, guys, now the hardest thing with this genre, I feel like, is going to come down to obviously making the song and getting a good idea, but the sound design of it and the pushing of certain sounds. Now, I talked a lot about this, and it took about 2 episodes to get this lead to the way it is, and even to this day, I still feel like it might be a little bit too high-driven. It's too much high frequencies, but I'm going to show you guys what it sounds like beforehand. Okay, so from here, we're going to EQ, obviously, some of the low here, which, again, this doesn't do much. It's just like, I call it artifact information that comes with the creation of the sound, especially when you FM something. There might be mud coming in like that, and that's totally fine. You can remove that. However, now we're going to start to push the sound with the Camel Crusher, with the British Crunch. Now brace your ears. Okay, and then we're going to add a FabFilter Saturn pushing the sound, and I'll be making a tutorial about this guy eventually because it's super powerful. It's the new Saturn II, and we're utilizing it to, again, push the sound even more, but we're also sort of shaping it as we go. All right, so from there, you can kind of tell the sound sounds dope, but there's a lot of cleaning up to do, and that is the key. So from there, we're going to start to kind of remove frequencies that are just, again, too much. So we can kind of see there's a bit too much of this guy here, which is 265, which is not a great place to have overload because, again, as you guys know, if you remove 250, you're supposed to remove mud, but too little of it, it starts to sound hollow. So you got to be really careful with that. I don't know what the fuck I did there. All right. So okay. From there, we utilize mid-side EQ, and this is where this tip comes really in handy, in my opinion, because a lot of people will use the normal EQ. And the key thing is, with some sounds, you might start to get artifacts in the stereo signal. So if I remove the mono signal completely right now, that's a lot of information added from the heavy processing that we've been doing. Now, you can definitely try and minimize that with an EQ beforehand, but again, it's better to do it afterwards so that you get all the juices out, and from there you just remove the junk that comes with it, because again, you're pushing this stuff hard. So we're gonna leave that there, and then in the mono signal, that's where the meat of the sound sounds really good. Now watch what happens if I leave this off. The third tip, guys, is going to be one of the hardest ones to implement for people, but it must be said, and that is the little things matter. And what I mean by the little things is I mean the things like the little fills, the little reverses, those little moments in the track where it's just one bass shot, but it makes the biggest of differences. If you take away all of that, you're gonna notice the track sounds okay, but you're gonna lack all of that nice little movement that it gives you. And when you add it, it just brings it all back, and it makes it sound very interesting to hear. The key thing though is that a lot of people have trouble with this, and the best thing I can tell you guys to do is don't be afraid to use loops. Don't be afraid to get inspired from other people or copyright. And what I mean by that is if you have a Seth Hills track and you have a similar rhythm to him and he does a fill here, here, and here, you can use that sort of as a cue for yourself to know, hey, maybe I should do the same thing, add a cue here. Over time, you're gonna notice that you're gonna get a little inspired as you start to add them, because you're gonna wanna do call-in responses like you know, similar stuff like that. But I find that's a really cool tip for you guys to utilize. Again, the little things matter, so pay attention to them, guys. And it could be as little as adding white noise to reverses, to maybe coming in with an accentuated bass like I'm gonna show you right now. Little things matter, guys, and it's very apparent. So I'll show you guys the example here. So I'm gonna try and remove a lot of the additive stuff that we have going on here that give the sound a little bit more of a nice little groove to it. Okay, so we removed a lot. Now, let's say that I'm like, Sen, you're just taking off stuff that you shouldn't have been. Okay, I'll take off the bass one shot. I'll add it back in the vocal and whatnot. But you're still going to see that there's still a lot that's going to feel like it's missing. Okay, so now as we start to add them back in, first off, the thing with ear candy fills and whatnot is that you want to utilize them when there's empty spaces in the song, like do 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 do, and then do 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 do. Obviously, there's a big gap there that you can use sort of as a call or a response to it. Okay, so for instance, here we can start to utilize bass shots. We can start to utilize little things that will accentuate that. So I'm gonna bring in the buildup here, which again we use part of sort of as a call, so that way, as you can see. Once again, in from that motherfucking bass drop. Once again. So this is just a technique that they use a lot in future bass. So it's similar to that. You're just guiding the listener somewhere. Seth Hill does it with other sort of effects as well as Julian Jordan. But again, use your creativity. Maybe you like the drum fills more, or you like to utilize effects and whatnot. But they play a huge role. From there, we do have these reverses, which you can utilize. And they help a lot in just, again, leading the listener. Here's a short gate as well. That sounds like. And again, little. Once again, that motherfucking bass drop. Once again. Okay, now a lot of like one of the things I see now used a lot is bass accentuation, and what I mean by that is the fact that a lot of you guys know, okay, you're gonna have your one shot where you're gonna have like a, which is cool. But what I notice a lot of people don't like to do is they don't like to accentuate certain parts of the bass. And you can accentuate them on certain key specific spots to help create something. You can also hear this in the Kirby jaw drop. So when we have the bass. Okay, so again, that ramp here does a lot, and you can again decide to put it anywhere where you feel it's important and where it can accentuate the beat. You can use a tom, you can use any sort of bass as long as you're removing the low end from it. But the key thing with that again is you want to accentuate. All of these little things add up to give you something groovy and to give you something good. The other thing too is white noise. A lot of people just see it as an effect, but we can also utilize it to again emphasize certain parts. So for instance here, the bass is layered with that as well as the reverse. So when you play them together, they just give you some really cool stuff. For instance. Once again, that motherfucking bass drop. Once again. The fourth tip I have for you guys is similar to the second one, but it's a little different as we're not going to use it to push the sound that much, but we're going to use it to essentially make it sound a little bit more rich, and that is going to be saturation is key. Now, the problem with saturation is that a lot of you guys are scared to touch it because you feel like you're going to mess stuff up, and it's very hard to mess stuff up with saturation if you're doing it, lightly. For instance, we can put saturation on a kick, we can put saturation on the drums, we can put saturation on the lead, we can put saturation on the bass. You get my drift. You can add it to certain things. Now, I used to have a mentor that used to say, if you're gonna pull the volume up on something, why don't you just saturate it so you bring it up with added taste to it. And then again, if you guys remember from the second tip, you can always remove the unwanted stuff that came with that. So check it out. This is how we saturate. I'll show you guys some examples of it and the difference that it makes. Saturation is key, guys, and like I said, it's very hard to fuck stuff up when you add saturation to it. A lot of times it does more good than bad unless you're pushing it to God knows where. But saturation can be used on almost anything: drums, leads, basses, you name it. And I'll give you guys an example here. Here we have a saturator which is called Black Box, and again, I plan on making videos of these guys, and this is my favorite one that I've been utilizing a lot. But again, it makes the biggest of differences when it comes to the sound of something. For instance, I'll give you some examples. The bass. You can see that it gives it a little bit more oomph, and that's what I like Black Box. One, it's very simple to use. But at the same time, you can get a little adept with it by utilizing, again, the saturation frequency here, which I'm not utilizing. You got to put. Now, the cool thing about saturation, it also has this sort of compression effect, which just brings the sound up. Let's say you have a sound that's like boo. When you saturate it enough, it will go boom. And that's the cool thing about it. It sort of has this compression effect. It's bad to say it's compressing, but it just brings most of the sound up. And again, it's something that you should be using. I'll give another example on the kick. Same thing. Now, one of the key things in the series that I emphasized to you guys was the fact that, again, if you saturate and you make it louder, let's say by dB here, make sure you bring it back down a bit just so you can hear it with it and without it. So make sure to pay attention to it. Bring down the volume so you can hear the difference that it makes. You don't want volume to be a deciding factor whether you think it's good or not. You want it to be the same volume consistently on, with it off, with it on, and from there make an educated decision if it's worth having the saturator on there, if it's worth the beautiful CPU power. But let's say we have these drums. These drums are already very heavy up there. But I can also say, you know what, these drums are already pushed. I'm just going to saturate them a little bit. Again, as long as I don't overdo it. You can accentuate it a little bit. Here, I would probably just lower the volume. Now, you know you've overdone it because watch what happens when I push it hard. And start to hear the sound quality just starts to degrade a little bit. And that's when you know when you've taken it just a tad bit overboard. So again, you got to be careful with it. As long as you're not pushing hard and you're using it to accentuate, there's really nothing wrong with it. And finally, guys, the last tip I have for you guys is in adding variation. Now, a lot of times when people hear variation, they think they need to completely rework the track in the second part of the drop or in the second part of the first drop. But in reality, all you really need to do sometimes is maybe add a bit of variation to the drums or save the fast drums for that last second part of the drop. Or even on the second drop, you can come in with a new percussion element that just changes it completely. Those little things make the biggest of differences, and I'll show you what I mean right now. All right, guys, in the last final thing we need to talk about that was very important in the series was adding variation. Now, I do a little bit of the rework on the second part of the drop, which some people were saying, you know what, I don't think it was needed. I feel like you should have had the same idea and just maybe added the fast drums, which we have. But one of the things that people heavily overlook are the drums. A lot of people, since we like to use drum loops sometimes, drop the drum loop, they have it going and whatnot, and that's it. But using a fast drum loop can add a huge amount of variation. It can push the energy up in a song. You can add rides. You can add a lot of stuff to just move it forward. For instance, here, the first part of this. These two drums here just add a bit more of faster momentum to it and change it up a lot. I didn't need to do this fancy whatever I did. Okay. So that's a form of way of adding variation. But again, next time you drop the song, obviously a lot of you guys already know how to do this, which is very generic, and they do it in tech house, G house, mama house, you know, you get it. So that's a form of variation as well, which again changes the drop. But when you drop here, you can choose to maybe bring in the perk faster instead of waiting to bring it. You just bring it in there, so that acts as a form of variation. Okay, so adding variation, again, one of the most overlooked things are the drums. A lot of people think that, just put a drum loop and that's it. No, if you want to add variation, you can add it with drums, you can add it with the effects, you can add it with tone change. So you can change the way the lead sounds, bring it down an octave, bring it up. Some people don't like that one because it might sound cheesy up an octave. But again, those are good ways that you can add variation to your song without doing a major overhaul on it. You can definitely do your little switch and overhaul. But again, just giving you guys some options there because you don't need to take it that further. All right, guys, and those are going to be the 5 best tips from the start to finish series of making modern bass house, modern big room, whatever you want to call it. To this day, I didn't learn what the genre was for that. But again, it was fun to make it. I realized it's not for me, but I had a lot of fun. It was a good change of workflow, and I hope that a lot of you guys find it useful. And as always, guys, if you have questions, leave them down in the comments. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time for another video. It's damn hot if you can't see the sweat, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out, and you guys have a good night.